a huge privilege to have been present.
You know, Christiane and Richard and I were talking about the Archbishop's comments, Archbishop Welby, about the Queen, and that he seemed to capture so beautifully what we've heard so much about. He described her as joyful and then present for so many. And it seems that's what you felt. You talk about, obviously, they were the dignitaries and the princes and the princesses from so many countries in that abbey, but also the regular people.
Absolutely.
Whom she had honored.
And it was, you know, and I was thinking about this as well, the coffin there with the royal standard, with the sceptre and the orb and the imperial state crown, you know, everyone could see that from wherever they were at some point during that service. It was very much like the Queen during her lifetime. You know, people just had to catch a glimpse of her and it touched them. And it was something they would remember for the rest of their lives. And I think we've seen that again today. And you can see it now in the crowds of people outlining, you know, the highway to see just a glimpse of it going past. She meant so much to so many people. And the fact that you had the whole world gather there to pay their respects today just sums it all up.
We were saying that in the UK, in a normal year, there are 2 or 3 state visits. There were hundreds of state visits in just days and just hours, all gathered together. And as you watched that procession in the Abbey, what was the emotion like when you saw King Charles all the way down to Prince George, the 9-year-old son of Kate and William? Did you see the emotions on their faces?
I think their composure was remarkable. I think the children in particular are extremely well behaved. I thought that it was a very difficult moment for all of them, particularly as they were walking in procession behind the coffin. It must have taken great courage to do that, as we've seen them on display over the course of the last 10 days, and they have managed to contain their emotions exceptionally well. But nevertheless, it appears to have been very difficult. I thought particularly the King, as God Save the King, rang out around the Abbey.
Yes,
that was a huge moment for him.
What was watching his face? How did he? Could you see any of his internal emotions as they played that at that moment?
He just looked incredibly pensive, very solemn. And I'm sure he was just thinking, you know, my goodness, he has sat in that place so many times over the years and sung God Save the Queen to his mother, and suddenly the congregation is singing it for him and she is no longer there, and that is a huge moment in his life.
It's a moment, Richard, that when he realized. Obviously, you know, there's the exhaustion and the process, and they've known this was going to happen, but then it happens, and there are still moments as a human being, right?
And that is what I think many of us are still coming to terms with as British and citizens. You know, that moment we knew it couldn't last forever, but now, it's happened. And to your point about the King, he summed it up, the weight of history. It's worth remembering. It's obvious, I know, but it's worth remembering that these people, 15, 20 deep, watching this procession, they're there voluntarily. They're there because they've made an individual decision. You know, in some countries where you bus them in, there was no need to here. By the hundreds of thousands, people are on the street by their choice.
Richard, you said something a few moments ago when we weren't, you know, on air, but you said that had you not been working, you would have been there.
It's not an if or a possibility, it's a when. If I'd not been working this week, I would absolutely have slept on the streets, as I did for the wedding of Charles and Diana, for Diana's funeral, but since then I've been working on these royal events, but no question about it. For me, it would have been the only place to be.
The only place to be, just the beloved figure. As you think back on your memories, you met the Queen.
Yeah, it's history. This is part of history. That's why so many people have come together in this moment of community, unity, and for a few days to rise above the fray and to, you know, have this amazing outpouring. They're traveling west of London now on a road that would normally take to the airport, but then leads on to Windsor, just to situate where the motorcade is. But you know, one thing we learned, didn't we, Erin, that the piper at the end of the funeral.
Oh, this is lovely.
At the end of the funeral mass inside the abbey was the same piper who woke her up every morning at 7:15, we're told, playing the pipes under her window for some 15 minutes. I think that's a remarkable thing. And then I think, as Kate Williams alluded to, this Queen once said to her people and to her troops, I am not the kind of monarch who can direct you into war or pass legislation, but what I can give you is my love and my service. And it, you know, she's going to be buried in St. George's Chapel, where we've just heard Henry VIII is buried. His daughter became the first great Elizabethan, who once famously said, when she was seeing off her troops into battle, you know, I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England at that. And it's remarkable that this second Elizabeth was able in some way to also have that power just by the majesty and the unity that she brought, even though it's not governing power.
And Christian, you also, as I mentioned briefly, but tell us about meeting the Queen.
Well, look, I mean, you know,
moment.
I was very, very, very proud to have been honoured by the Queen. The government sets, you know, draws up a list for who are going to get what's called Queen's Honours, and I got mine for services to journalism, and it remains, you know, a source of great pride. And she was wonderful, and I thanked her at the time for that, but also for opening the CNN office here in London. So here's the thing, just to say that just about everybody, as Emily has said and others have said, have a moment, whether it's us, whether it's the royal family, the dignitaries, or all the people who met her on her walkabouts, on her openings of, you know, roads and hospitals and churches.
She was
schools,
touchable in that sense to the average
and
person.
people feel that they knew her, and they kind of did, because it was 70 years, especially the Christmas broadcast. I mean, that was a tangible thing.
That well, even in the U.S., of course, we saw that every year.
So, one of the things that you talked about is this ability of her to just be ordinary with you. And when I met her, when she opened the CNN office in London, we were terribly worried. Would she go up the stairs or would she take a ramp to get into the studio?
There she is with you.
Absolutely. And she was, so what she's talking about there, she's asking me, what about my earpiece?
Really?
Yes, she was fascinated that we were able to talk and listen at the same time. And she was quite, she had that, I've heard it said a million times, she had that ability to make you feel you were just the person she was hoping to meet.
Well, that's a gift that so few human beings have.
Absolutely. And then the other time I saw her, I only saw her hand. I was covering Mikhail Gorbachev's visit to Windsor Castle. I was a young junior radio reporter for another, and I stayed later than I should have done because I was doing a last report. And I was in the attic and I walked downstairs. I thought, I'll have a quick look round. And then I suddenly realised in front of me there was a footman, a butler, holding a tray with a glass. And out came the hand, and I could hear the Queen's voice saying thank you. And I just backed off quickly before I got arrested.
But, you know, the idea of Gorbachev, I mean, she has seen so many world leaders and so many huge epochs of history, from fascism to communist totalitarianism to just about all the major events of the 20th and 21st century she's lived through. I mean, it is remarkable, you know, the explosion of democracy as well.
And, you know, Emily, it's interesting. Christian and I were mentioning earlier, and this came to mind looking at the Queen with you, Richard, at the Bureau, in that bright neon green, that her clothing choices were so purposeful. Christian was saying, sort of, to give her presence, to
Very
say,
much so.
I am here, and I do want to be seen.
Very much so. It was about being seen. She always said she had to be seen to be believed. But just going back to what you were saying there about her making people feel comfortable and giving a sense of that through her clothing. I was present when President Obama came to visit her at Windsor Castle, and she arrived as the helicopter landed in her country clothes and wearing a silk headscarf. And that, to me, was an incredible moment. You know, she's greeting the US president in her relaxed weekend clothes, and it was very much telling the world, you know, this is a friendly meeting, we're very comfortable together. It was very special to see that.
And President Obama has spoken about that, and before Nelson Mandela was known to be the only person to call her Elizabeth. I mean, out of the horror of apartheid comes this unbelievable friendship with the first black elected leader of a member of the Commonwealth. And she and he bonded, you know, incredibly well. And I think one of the great colour clothing moments was when she donned again that emerald green and went to Ireland for the first time, 100 years of British monarchy in that place, and then reached across the aisle in Northern Ireland to former members of the IRA who had actually blown up her own, uncle by marriage, Lord Mountbatten. She had this ability to be part of the reconciliation process that those people talk about now.
Richard,
The clothes had to be constructed, I think, because not only did they could never be too fashionable. They could never be
No,
too...
they were purposefully, it seemed, not